Hi friends, good morning. This is Hishmat ma'am. Today we are going to discuss in history unit 3 about World War II. Already we discussed about World War I, the world between the two world wars. Now the next unit is World War II. Let me see what is the summary of this chapter about the World War II. The war lasted from 1939 till 1945. This is Second World War, and was fought in almost every part of the world, in the Europe, Africa, and the Asia Pacific. The Allies, initially Britain and France, and subsequently the US, the Tsar, that is Russia, and the United States, fought against the Axis powers. Which other countries were called as Axis powers? Germany, Italy, and Japan. During the Second World War, these three countries were the Axis powers: Germany, Italy, and Japan. Initially, both the German army in Europe and Japan in the East were very successful. However, the United States, with its enormous resource, also joined the Allies, both Germany and Japan, which defeated after many prolonged fighting. The war, which ended in Europe in May 1945, but it ended in the Asia only in August 1945. After the Americans, they dropped the atom bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The post-World War saw the rise of two superpowers. That means after the World War II, the two supreme powers were there, namely United States and the USSR, that is Russia. Those two countries were in the arms race, especially to build their nuclear weapons. During the war, the Nazis resorted to killing the Jews in concentration camps. Nearly 6 months, the Jews were transported to these camps, tortured and killed. So, this is a summary of the entire lesson of the World War II. Now, we are going to see what are the causes and effects of World War II. Causes. The devastation caused by World War I was of such magnitude that it was referred to as the Great War, or the war to end all wars. The belligerent nations, especially the Allies, had no desire for a second prolonged conflict, and this was the main driving force behind their actions after the end of World War I. The immediate and primary cause of World War II was the aggressive military offensive undertaken by a resurgent Germany and a fast developing Japan. Now we are going to see Germany and the Treaty of Versailles. You know very well this Treaty of Versailles only created a seat for the Second World War. It was 1919. This is helpful for your timeline. The Treaty of Versailles ending World War I was signed in June 1919. Germany was forced to give up the territories to the west, north and east of the German border. Germany had to disarm and was allowed to retain only a very few restricted armed forces like Army, Navy and Air Force. As a reparation for the war, that is, war indemnity, Germany was expected to pay for the military and civilian cost of the war to the Allied nations. So failure of the League of Nations. The treaty, which treaty? The Treaty of Versailles also set up the League of Nations. On the initiative of President Woodrow Wilson of America, that is US, the League was expected to mediate between the countries and take action against the countries which indulged in military aggressions. Though US created the League of Nations, did not become a member of the League. The other allied nations were also determined to maintain a non-interventionist attitude, and in consequences, the League remained an ineffectual international body. Due to that, the post-war crisis, post-war means after the World War, how the Germany faces the crisis, that we are going to see now. As mentioned above, the three main clauses of the Treaty of Versailles, especially the imposition of penal repression, caused a great discontent in Germany. The problems which many countries faced the post-World War I, which decades led to the rise of extreme right-wing dictatorship in Italy, that is Mussolini, the leader of the Italy, Germany, Hitler, and Spain, Franco. So Germany experienced both high unemployment and severe inflation after the war, and its currency became practically worthless. So during this wartime, it was become as a worthless. Look at this, huge worthless money for the bread. For the bread also they are unable to purchase. Those money valuable is gone down. During this tenure, Germany need a proper leader. So rise of Adolf Hitler. Now Hitler became the leader of the Germany. Adolf Hitler, he was able to exploit the general discontent among the Germans. Adolf Hitler was gifted with a great oratorical skills, and he founded the National Social Party, generally known as the Nazi Party, which we have discussed about deeply in the previous chapter. Hitler came to power 1933 and ruled Germany till 1945. The recruitment for the armed forces and the manufacture of armaments and machinery for the army, navy and air force with large amounts of government spending resulted in economic revival and solved the problem of unemployment in Germany. Italy's break with Britain and France in the wake of Mussolini's invasion of Ethiopia, which resulted in better relationship between the Italy and Germany. Later, with Japan joining this alliance, it became Rome-Berlin-Tokyo axis. Rome, it's the capital of Italy. Berlin, it's the capital of Germany. Tokyo, it's the capital of Japan. So in 1938, Hitler invaded Austria and Czechoslovakia. Czech. Look at this world map. The places. World War II. Axis power versus the Allied powers. Axis powers, Allied the powers. So Allies and non-intervention. There were also act of aggression by Italy and Japan. So Italy invaded Ethiopia in 1935 and Albania in 1939. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria, and in 1937 it invaded China and seized the Beijing. It is the capital of China. All these were ignored by the Allies, and the League of Nations was unable to take any action against them. So you know already the League of Nations was failure because of these superpowers. Munich Pact. In 1938, Prime Minister Chamberlain concluded the Munich Pact with Germany. Prime Minister Chamberlain belonged to the Britain. Okay, so Britain Prime Minister. Then the Munich Pact with the Germany, which was shameful acceptance of Germany's invasion of Czechoslovakia to annex the German-speaking Sudetenland. In 1939, the Soviet Union independently concluded a non-aggression pact with Germany. Though Hitler gave an assurance in the Munich Pact that Germany would not attack any other country, this was broken immediately. In 1939, he invaded Czechoslovakia again. Poland was attacked next, and this was the final act which resulted in the declaration of war by Britain and France against Germany. In Britain, Prime Minister Chamberlain resigned in 1940, and Winston Churchill, who had always warned about Hitler and his military ambitions, became the Prime Minister. He became the Prime Minister during this tenure. Munich Pact. Adolf Hitler and the Britain Minister is there. Now, course of the war. How many years it lasted? What is the nature of this war? Look at this map. It shows you the entire world. Nature of the war. World War II was fought on two distinct fronts, Europe and the Asia Pacific. It's in Europe. The war was fought by the Allies against Germany and Italy. In the Asia Pacific, the Allies fought with Japan. World War II was a modern war fought with heavy military equipment such as tanks, submarines, battleships, aircraft carriers, fighter planes, and bomber planes. This was an expensive and prolonged war of attrition. So World War II Axis powers and allied powers. Which are the countries were there in Axis powers? Germany, Italy and Japan. Allied, Britain, France and Russia. US intervened after a long time when Japan invaded the Pearl Harbor city, destroyed. Okay. So, outbreak of war. Look at that. Britain and France declared war on Germany in September 1939. In June 1940, Italy joined Germany. And in September 1940, Japan also joined in the Axis powers. So they were the three. Along with that, Italy, Germany and the Japan were the Axis powers. Look at the Blitzkrieg. The German army followed a tactic of lightning strike, which called as the Blitzkrieg, to storm into various countries and overrun them. The British Royal Navy continued to be the most powerful among the European naval forces and ensured that a seaborne invasion of Britain was not possible. So, important events during the time. Dunkirk. In May 1940, more than 3 lakh British and French soldiers were forced back to the beaches in Dunkirk. Britain would have been found it difficult to regroup if so many of them soldiers had been lost at Dunkirk. So, Battle of Britain they've started by July 1940. It was feared that the Germans were planning an invade Britain. So, Hitler wanted to force the Britain to accept his proposal for peace by prolonged airborne bombing campaign. In September 1940, London was bombed mercilessly. London is the capital of Britain. So, it was bombed mercilessly, an action known as the Blitzkrieg. Continuously they are bombing to blast that. This is the Hurricanes. Royal Air Force were used. And this is Spitfires. The raid stopped after October 1940. The Germans dropped their plans to invade the Britain because of the failure of this battle. Now Lend-Lease, 1941-1945. Lend-Lease, lease. It's like a year-wise or monthly-wise, whatever they are just taking into agreement basis. President Roosevelt realized that the United States had to change its policy of isolation. So he started a program of Lend-Lease in March 1941. Arms, food, military equipment and other supplies were sent to Britain to disguised as a loan, which would be returned after use. Invasion of Russia in 1941-42. June 1941, the German army invaded Russia to destroy the communist regime and also exploit the Russia's natural resources, especially oil. Battle of Stalingrad, 17 July 1942 to 2nd February 1943. Look at that battle. In August 1942, the Germans attacked the Stalingrad, which stretching about 30 miles, that is around 50 kilometers, along the banks of the river Olga. Stalingrad was a large industrial city producing armaments and tractors. Capturing the city would cut the Soviet transport links with southern Russia, and Stalingrad would then enable the invading Germans to have access to the oil fields of the Caucasus. Russian people suffered not only from bad working and living conditions but also from the ill treatment at German hands in the occupied areas. Altogether, over 1/10 of the Russia's population died. Yet the people remained loyal to the government despite Hitler's hopes of an anti-Stalin revolution. They successfully defended the city of Stalingrad. The next it was started Battle of El Alamein in 1942. Then surrender of Italy in 1943. Mussolini was a great leader, in the Italy. So he has been thrown out and the new government of Italy surrendered the Allies in 1943. However, the Germans set Mussolini up a puppet regime in the north. Mussolini was killed in April 1945 by the Italian mob, the same group. So he was murdered. Now, end of the Hitler. The Germany is going to be end. What is there in the crisis? The Allied force under the command of General Eisenhower invaded the Normandy in France. Hitler committed suicide in April 1945. In 1945, they occupied parts of Berlin so that Germany was divided into two sections after the war. West Germany and the East Germany. War in the Asia Pacific region. Asia Pacific, Japan side now. Japan had entered visions of a glorious empire very much on the same lines as Hitler. How Hitler has started to occupy, like that Japan started to show the power. So the Japanese army invaded Manchuria in 1931. In 1937, Japan invaded China and seized the Beijing, that is Peking as it was then known. Beijing is the capital of China. Now it is called as a Peking, which had traditionally been the capital of China. The region around Shanghai was also captured, and the Nanking, the capital, was captured at the end of the year. Civilians were killed and mass for the sport, and all females from children to old women were raped, and many were tortured and killed after being raped. Pearl Harbor City. Look at that important event. Pearl Harbor. It is a place of US which was attacked by the Japan. On December 1941, Japan attacked American Navy installation in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, island of Hawaii, without warning. Many battleships and numerous fighter planes were destroyed. So here, the United States enter inside the war. The United States declared war on Japan, with Britain and China also joining in. This brought together both Asia Pacific and European war into one common. Now the next thing is the Japanese aggression in Southeast Asia. The Japanese had spectacular success in their plan to extend their empire throughout Southeast Asia. Guam, the Philippines, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaya, the Dutch East Indies, that is Indonesia, and Burma all fell to the Japanese. Now the next point of view is Hiroshima and Nagasaki. August 1945. The Japanese generals refused to surrender, and finally the US dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. As the Japanese still refused to surrender, another atom bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. Japan ultimately announced surrender on 15th August 1945 and formally signed 2 September 1945, bringing an end to World War II. Now, what were the effects of the war? New geopolitical power alignment. World War II changed the world in fundamental ways. The world was polarized into two main blocs led by superpowers, one led by the United States and another with the USSR. Nuclear proliferation. The United States and the Soviet Union entered into a race to have more nuclear-powered weapons. They built a large stockpile of such weapons. Defense spending skyrocketed in many countries. International agencies. Many international agencies, in particular the United Nations, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, came into existence, providing a forum for countries large and small. Colonial powers were forced to give independence to former colonies in the process of decolonization. India was the first to achieve the independence. Holocaust and its fallout. What is Holocaust? The word Holocaust is used to describe the genocide of nearly 6 million Jews by the Germans during World War II. After Hitler, when he came to power, the Jews were persecuted in many ways. They were deprived of their civil rights, their properties were confiscated, and many were confined to death. So eventually, the Nazis came up with the notion of the final solution, which was to exterminate the Jews completely. Now, the birth of Israel. A major outcome of the Holocaust was the creation of the State of Israel as a homeland for the Jews. While this was historically the original home of the Jews during Roman times. Now, the new international order. By 1941, the United States and Britain began to give serious consideration to the need for the international cooperation for achieving lasting peace among all nations. International, economic, and financial stability were also important objectives. United Nations, that is UNO, like how we are forming about a League of Nations, Like that, United Nations is one of the another organization. It was introduced in the year 1945. The headquarters of the UNO. This is symbol of the UN. Headquarters is New York. The first initiative for the United Nations came from the United States and Britain in 1941 when they issued a joint declaration known as Atlantic Charter. This declaration of the United Nations was accepted by all the 26 countries which were fighting against Axis powers, Germany, Italy and Japan, on New Year's Day 1942. The Charter of the United Nations was signed on June 26, 1945 by 51 nations. India, which was not an independent country, then also was a signatory to the Charter. Now the United Nations has 193 member states and each one being a small has an equal vote in United Nations. Look at this, UN headquarters, New York. Now what are the organs there for the UN? General Assembly and Security Council. In the General Assembly, it is a body in which each member state is represented. It meets once in a year and issues of interest and points of conflict are discussed in the Assembly. The Security Council has 15 members. 5 countries, the United States, Britain, France, Russia and China are the permanent one. And the other 10 are the non-permanent members. But they are electing in rotation. Administrative structure. This is one of your second detailed answer. The executive wing of the United Nations in the United Nations Secretariat. It is headed by the Secretary General, who is elected by the General Assembly on the recommendation of Security Council. The Secretary General, which along with his cabinet and the other officials runs the United Nations. The International Court of Justice, which headquartered at The Hague in Holland. It is a judicial wing of the United Nations. The Economic and Social Council, the fifth organ of the United Nations, is responsible for coordinating all the economic and social work of the United Nations. So, which shows the other important organs of the UN associated with the organization deal with area of critical interest to the world at large like food, health and education and culture. These are Food and Agriculture Organization FAO, World Health Organization WHO, UNESCO, that is United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. Now what are the activities of the UN? Over the decades, the United Nations has expanded its activities in response to the changing problems facing the world. So thus, in the 1960s, decolonization was an important issue, human rights, the problems of refugees, climate change, gender equality, all now within the ambit of the activities of the United Nations. World Bank, main important one. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, referred to as the Bretton Woods twins. They were both established. Look at this, Bretton Woods Conference. Both established in 1945 after the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944. Bretton Woods Conference. So, two main organs of the World Bank, the International Bank of Reconstruction and Development, IBRD, and the International Development Agency, IDA. Together, they are often referred to as the World Bank. Now, International Monetary Fund, IMF. International Monetary Fund was primarily the brainchild of Harry Dr. White and John Maynard Keynes, the famous economists. It was formally against 1945 with 29 member countries. Its primary objective is to ensure financial stability and development across the world. Look at what are the objectives of this IMF. IMF, International Monetary Fund. The objectives of IMF are to foster the global monetary cooperation, secure the financial stability, facilitate international trade, promote high employment and sustainable economic growth, and reduce the poverty around the world. The next point of view, the post-war welfare states in Europe. The term welfare state refers to the concept that the government is responsible for the social and economic welfare of the people, thus expanding the role of the state beyond providing defense and maintaining the law and order. In 19 42. The report, commonly known as Beveridge Report, was published in the United Kingdom, which proposed a series of measures which the government should adopt to provide citizens with adequate income, health care, education, housing, and employment to overcome the poverty and disease which were the major impediments to general welfare. So this was the post-war welfare in the states of the Europe. That is activities of the UNO. So everything which shows you about in your Second World War II. So please kindly go through the entire video clip. Then only you will come to know that what is happening. Okay dears, thank you.